Right, everybody, it is 12 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to kill the music and we will start right on time. We've got plenty to get through today, but welcome to this webinar, how leaders can coach for emotional intelligence. Okay, important topic, one that I often get asked about. How do we develop emotional intelligence and how important is it to leadership? So today we are going to explore emotional intelligence and what it does with leaders and how we as leaders can coach in a way that develops emotional intelligence. Okay, and so what I want to start off right at the beginning is I want you to give me your one word barometer. So for those of you that have run workshops with me before, you probably experienced me asking this right at the start. And so for those of you that haven't though, your one word barometer is, how would you describe your current emotional state right now in one word? What are you feeling right now? Okay, one word, one feeling, put it in the chat. Okay, I want you to tell me what that is. So while that's starting to come through, just a bit of an outline today. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of emotions and emotional intelligence, why it's important in leadership. We'll unpack emotional intelligence a little bit so we understand what we're talking about. And then we're going to go through 3 different scenarios where you can, as a leader, might be able to coach your people in a way that is going to develop. All right, we'll get really practical. At the end of that, if anyone wants some help, I'll give you a couple of options as to where to go from here if you would like some help. And then we're going to have questions at the end. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if that's okay with everybody. As you can see, I'm getting you guys to use the chat today, and I really want you to lean in and be engaged and make sure that you do that. I want to make it as engaging as possible. So please get used to do that. If you have questions throughout today, please put them in the chat. I will try and answer them as we go. I may not always get there, all right? But I apologize if I don't get it as we go, but what we do is time at the end where you can put that question in the chat again, all right? So I really want you to be engaging. I want you also to take notes and write some things down, because I know that's going to help kind of engage you a little bit more. It's going to help some of the content from today stick in your brain and you'll remember it a little bit more, and therefore you will be able to apply it. Okay, so I'm just loving some of those one word barometers coming through here. Peter's saying he is energized. Annette is saying she's excited. Daryl, calm, very good. Rachel, positive. Tim, content. I love that one, Tim. Whenever anyone described my grandfather, they said he was learnt to be content in all life circumstances. So always rings true for me. Daniel, interested, excellent. So I love some of these one word barometers. Craig, you're saying curious as well, excellent. So a little exercise there, a bit of a check-in so I know how you guys are going, but we'll also talk about why it's important. It's a small little activity, but it can have big impacts if you are intentional with the way that you use things. All right, so look, let's get into it. I wanted to start, all right, with this man here in the photo. And some of you, I know Craig and a couple of others who have a background in psychology might be able to recognize this particular gentleman. It is Phineas Gage. He's a really interesting character. He was a railway worker in the United States. And what actually happened was he was working, and there was an explosion one day, and a tamping rod, which is what you can see in his hand right there, actually went through his cheek, all right, and came out the other side of his head. And so he had a whole lot of brain damage. Now, he actually survived. Really interesting story. He survived, and his memory and a lot of his speech and the way he could interact was actually not impacted at all. However, uh, what happened that where the rod actually went through some of the frontal lobes in his brain that are used in the processing of emotions. And so what that meant was that some of his emotional ability to use and interpret emotions and those sorts of things was really severely impacted. Now, there was a number of kind of flow-on effects of that, but one of those really interesting impacts of the removal of that part of his brain was that he really struggled to make decisions. And even some of the most simple decisions, even just estimating kind of the size or the amount of money that was needed for certain tasks, which we would all think is a pretty, and we're not talking kind of big strategic organizational tasks, we're just talking simple, what do you need to buy a loaf of bread type thing. He would really struggle with that. And it was the first indication in psychology that emotions and emotional intelligence is actually really important to make even the most basic of decisions. And so when we start talking about the importance of emotions and emotional intelligence, that's where it starts. It really central just to making basic decisions and making good decisions. Now, obviously, as leaders, we need to be making good decisions all the time. And so therefore, the better we are when it comes to emotional intelligence, the better decisions we are likely to make. And the next one, all right, I want to talk about is these two people here. This is Tracy Moffat, I believe her name is, and Ashkura, or I haven't got the pronunciation quite right. But these two professors over in New Zealand are really driving what is known as the Dunbar experiment. Now, this is one of the most fascinating psychological research studies in the world and throughout history. What's amazing about this one is that in Dunedin, they have taken 1,000 people from birth and they have studied them throughout their lifetime. We are now well into the 50th decade of this study, and they've been following that same 1,000 people. There's very little drop off in the study. Normally with these longitudinal studies, we get a significant drop off, but there's still, I think around 800 of the original 1,000 are still participating in the study. And every couple of years they check in, they do all these different kind of scientific tests and measurements and things on it. And they've been able to track a whole lot of different aspects of their life. And when it starts looking at life success, all right, people's success in life, in their careers, in their relationships, in their life in general, they've been able to kind of look at a whole lot of things and ask, does socioeconomic status determine success? Does education determine success? Does intelligence determine success? And there's a whole lot of kind of surprising results. But the number one consistent factor in people's life when it comes to determining whether or not they are going to be successful, or at least promoting the likelihood of their success, is not things like socioeconomic status or education levels or IQ, but it was the ability to self-regulate, all right, and particularly self-regulate their emotions. All right, and that's really kind of one of the core skills of emotional intelligence. And so if we're going to be successful in life and leadership, really that ability to control and regulate your emotions is so important. And it's why it's kind of foundational in all of us to be able to have good emotional intelligence. Okay, but that's kind of in general. What about leadership specific? Why is emotional intelligence important for leadership? All right. The first part here is around leadership derailers. When it comes to leadership and being in there, so the majority of things that derail people's leadership often are found to be emotionally intelligence related. So there's a number of studies here from the Center of Creative Leadership, And they reckon that 75% of careers are derailed for reasons relating to emotional competencies, including the ability to handle interpersonal problems, unsatisfactory team leadership, and difficulty communication, handling conflict. And there's so many different derailers. You look at some others, you think about burnout and stress. Often the inability to deal with stress and manage that comes from, has emotional roots. We've also got things like fear of conflict or avoiding conflict, avoiding accountability, which often stem from emotional fears and not being able to deal with those adequately. And so they become really important there. All right, the question here, what drives, this is from Tasman, or Tamzin, sorry. What drives people's ability to regulate their emotions? Look, there's a whole lot of things, Tamzin, and it's, in terms of what drives them, ultimately it's being able to get what you want, right? Is very much part of that, right? We have reward systems in our brain, and we have fear systems in our brain. It's things like keeping us safe, is really kind of driven by the amygdala and some of those automatic reactionary type things. But when it comes to actually kind of seeking out what we want, we've got to do things we don't want to do. We've got to regulate our emotions in order to get what we want. And is that a learnt behavior in childhood? Yes, often we do learn those things early on, but very much so we can learn those as adults as well. All right, individual performance as leaders is also desperately linked to our emotional intelligence. It's interesting here that Daniel Goleman, who's one of the big people in the space of emotional intelligence, kind of popularized the concept, I guess you could say. He said that he's got a study here that said 85% of people's competencies that separate the high performers from the average performers lie in the emotional intelligence domain. All right. And so the ability for individual leaders to be able to make good decisions and do what they need to in order to perform as a leader, often so the characteristics, the qualities, the things that determine whether or not they'll be successful can be linked in some part to their ability to regulate their emotions and then interact with other people accordingly. All right. And then we've got the collective performance piece, right? And when a team is working well together and they can all regulate their own emotions and also use their emotions effectively, then we get this team cohesion, we get good collaboration, we get good things like trust that are lying in there as well. Okay, and all of these sorts of people enjoy being with the team, and therefore they lean in. They're willing to give the extra discretionary effort, the extra 110%, in order to achieve team goals, right? And so when leaders can foster an environment that promotes that, then they're going to be super successful. And really, when we start talking about leadership as well, leadership isn't just getting people to perform, but it's also developing capability. And I'm really big on that. And so while emotional intelligence is really important for the leader to be successful, if a leader is going to develop the capability within their teams and develop other really successful leaders, they're going to have to teach them how to be emotionally intelligent in the way that they interact with the world. Okay. So that becomes really important. Now, emotions themselves, okay? A little bit of emotions 101. Who here has seen Inside Out? I actually think it's a great movie and kind of demonstrates a little bit, or in a really nice way that kids can understand some of the fundamentals of emotions. And, what we understand is that there are some basic emotions that exist. And all the other emotions are really just variations of those basic ones. Now, you know, in Inside Out, we've got the 5 emotions there. We've got joy, anger, sadness, fear, and envy. And depending on which model you look at, there's 5 emotions, or some models will have 7 emotions. But the idea is that there is just a few basic ones, and everything else is a variation. And so we get something that looks like this. All right, we've got the 5 basic emotions up the top, and then if we look at the intensity of the emotional experience of each of those 5, we actually get a whole lot. Okay, you know, I heard someone spruik the other day somewhere that there's 137 different emotions that are being characterized, and it's, you know, it's hard. Some people will say that one thing is an emotion and something's just the same thing under a different name, and all that sort of thing. But really, the concept that I want you to take away here is that. That we have some basic ones, and then we have an intensity level. All right, and it's actually really important to kind of understand, you know, how things relate. Understanding the different intensity of emotions, really it's the same emotion but different intensity, and where they kind of fit, really helps us to understand how emotions work. All right, and so often we don't talk about these sorts of things in the Western world. And so therefore we don't have a vocabulary to discuss it. We're not used to putting labels on things and then actually sitting there and differentiating emotions. So, you know, if I talk to some people, I say, what's the difference between being annoyed and being frustrated? And a lot of people really struggle. Okay, and if you look at this chart here, you can see annoyed is kind of it's that low one in the low level anger type thing, whereas frustrated is in that medium character. It's a different intensity of the same emotion. And what you can do then is go, okay, I understand that there's a different intensity there, but what then creates that intensity? What leads up? If you understand what shifts one motion from a low intensity into a medium intensity, you get to understand some of your triggers and some of the things that you can that make you feel certain emotions, and therefore you can do something about it. So for many people, annoyed is kind of like, you know, something that happens in the moment, and it's annoying, right? But frustrated, if you get a series of annoying events happening, that they all start to accumulate. And so frustration is really an accumulation of annoying stimulus. And you can see there that when you get those little things all building up to create frustration, and then ultimately, if that frustration has stress and pressure and a whole lot of other things adding to it, you know, we start to, you know, potentially become irate, or we become outraged. And as we understand the progression of emotions there, all right. And therefore, if we can get rid of the small annoyance, rather than just overlook it, we get rid of it, that can actually stop the long-term escalation of emotions occurring. Okay. And so that's all part of it. When we talk about emotional intelligence, if you want a definition, some of you love definitions. Here's one that I like. This is by Salovey and Mayer. 2 psychologists that have developed a pretty significant emotional intelligence test, right? And they talk about the ability to monitor one's own feelings and emotions and discriminate between them and use them as an information and guide, all right? To guide one's thinking, to guide one's actions and their behavior. And that's a really nice definition, but kind of how does that work practically? And well, if we look over to the right of your screen there, some of you will be familiar with this model. And this is Daniel Goleman's model. And he says that emotional intelligence really is starting with self-awareness. And, you know, I'll often say that you're controlled by what you're not aware of. Once you become aware of it, then you can exert control over it, whatever it is. Now, in the context of the webinar today, it is emotions, right? So if you're not aware of what your emotions are and how, you know, how you become to feel the things that you do, then those emotions are going to control your behavior, right? But once you become aware of it, once you become to understand how emotions work for you, then you can do something about it. Then you can self-manage, all right? You can regulate your own behavior, all right? And so that's really the self-management and self-regulation. I've kind of use those terms interchangeably. And then you can actually, engage in a behavior that's going to get you what you want, all right? Which is really important. And so once you become more aware of emotions in yourself, then you start to become more aware of the emotions in other people. And that's the social awareness piece, right? And once you become more aware of those emotions in others, then again, you can regulate your own behavior. You manage your own behavior in terms of getting the outcomes that you want, the relational outcomes that you want. And so therefore you are managing the relationship. Okay. And so that's kind of how it works. We start in that top left corner, we end in that bottom right corner, particularly in a team context. So I just want to take a moment there, and I want to ask you, which of those four quadrants do you think you would benefit most from developing, getting better at? Do you need to get better at the self-management piece, or do you need to get better at maybe the social awareness piece? You know what to do when people are feeling emotion, you're just not picking it up. So put it in the chat, okay? Which of those four quadrants do you need to get better at? Okay, so what do we got? James is saying self-management, self-regulation piece. Tamsin is saying self-management. All of you, Annette is going. Rachel's saying self-awareness. Yeah, you might be able to do something about it, but you're just not quite sure what is required. Relationship management is what Amy is saying. Same with Craig. Tim's talking about self-management. Peter, I need to get better at all of it. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We all will definitely benefit from improving in all areas. Okay, the other kind of model that I wanted to show you, just as we unpack emotional intelligence a little bit, is this one. And this is, I mentioned Mayer and Salovey and Caruso. They developed the Mesquite, which is a emotional intelligence a test and assessment. And basically their take on emotional intelligence is that it's a set of skills that you can learn and develop over time. And they split it into two parts. One is experiential. So the skills that you use when you are experiencing emotions. So first of all, there's perceiving piece, and it's being able to, again, it's that self-awareness, right? It's going, hey, I'm aware, I'm perceiving that I'm experiencing these types of emotions. And then there's the using, all right? And then it's saying, well, hey, given that I'm experiencing this emotion, how am I going to use that? What am I going to do? And how do I use the emotional information? And that's really important. I love what Susan David says. Emotions aren't directives, they are data. All right. Emotions don't, just because you feel a particular emotion doesn't mean you have to behave a particular way. It just gives you information. It's data, and you get to choose how you use that information. All right. So the ability to, one, perceive the emotional information, and two, use it, sits under that. They're two of the skills that Mayer and Salovey kind of articulate. The other one is strategic. All right. And here they talk about the understanding of emotions. So when that's what we were talking about before in saying, well, hey, frustration is an accumulation of annoyance. And so the progression of, annoyance into frustration, into an outburst or irate anger, is kind of understanding how emotions work. All right. So that's a skill. All right. That's a something that you can learn. And then there's the management piece. All right. Once I understand emotions, how do I use that understanding to manage my life, myself, the relationships, the world around me? How can I be strategic in applying the understanding that I have? Again, a learned skill. All right. And so, I'll ask the question again, which of those four skills would resonate with you that you think you need to develop a little bit more? And you can kind of combine these two models here. And really, when we start talking about the perceiving and the understanding, are really around developing self and social awareness. All right, they're the skills that you use in order to develop self-awareness or social awareness. And then it's the using and the managing are the skills that you use in order to regulate your own behavior and kind of manage the relationships that you have. Okay, and so that's kind of where, if we kind of pull emotional intelligence apart of it, it's kind of what we're talking about, right? It's the ability to pick up emotional information and perceive it in ourselves and others. And then it's our ability to use that information in a way to manage our own behavior and to manage how we interact with the relationships in the workplace. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we want to develop. Now, today's all about coaching, right? How do we develop that in our people using coaching? So coaching is strategic questioning, right? We're not telling people what to do. We're not telling people how to manage their emotions. But what we want to do is ask strategic questions to help them realize, to help them gain insight and to learn about themselves and their emotions, and kind of discover what they need to do in order to become more aware, in order to manage the relationships around us. All right, so let's look at a couple scenarios that might be beneficial. So the first one is individuals, right? And I want you to think about some individuals that you think would benefit in your workplace, in your teams, from coaching around the emotional intelligence space. So, this might be an individual who's lost control in a meeting. They've had an outburst and yelled at somebody else. It might be someone who's made some poor decisions in the workplace. And, it's pretty evident to you looking externally that they weren't in the right frame of mind, or there's been some emotional contribution towards the poor decision. It may just be someone who's pretty stressed out and not coping. All right. And so I want you to think about that. And as we go through these steps, think about how that would apply to that particular individual. All right. Potentially write it down so that you can go away and do something with it. So the first part here is just, again, this is developing a bit of understanding. So when we're working with individuals, so often what we're trying to do in these circumstances is help develop the emotional awareness and understanding. All right. And once we do that first, then we can shift into the self-management piece. What are you going to do about it? And so have that in mind. First, understand that the way kind of emotions work, all right, the way our mind works at a basic level, we have an event that causes a thought, and that gives us a reaction. Now, that reaction very often is an emotional reaction, which drives a behavioral reaction. Okay, so something happens, we have a thought that flashes through our head, we feel we get an emotional reaction, which was, we then drive our behavior. So emotions drive behavior, but our thoughts also drive our emotions. If you want a bit of an example here, not workplace related, but the classic one is you're walking through the woods and you see a bear. Now, what do? You kind of scream, right? Why? Because there's a thought that's gone through, the bear's going to eat me. And so you'll then have an emotional reaction, which will be one of fear. And you'll do one of, generally two things. You'll either freeze or you'll run away. Not too many people I know will try and fight a bear, but that's that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism at play. And so that's kind of how it works. Now, in a workplace, it might be that you almost have somebody says something that might jeopardize your project, and the thought that goes through is, that person's trying to undermine me, or what about all the hard work that's gone through my head, and that's going to produce emotions that probably of anger or frustration, a whole lot of different things. And then your behavior, either you don't talk to that person, or you get up and you yell at them, or whatever it might be. Okay, but that's kind of the basic framework of what's going on. Now, that happens really quickly. The thought and the emotion, it's quite often simultaneous, but the thought kind of happens first that drives the emotion, right? It determines what emotion that we feel. So what do we want to do, right? We're trying to foster this self-awareness and understanding in people. The first part is identify the emotions that's at play. All right. And my recommendation for you, remember we're coaching, we're strategic questioning. Don't go straight for how do you feel? All right. People are going to be interrogated. They're going to feel like you're putting them off guard and that sort of thing. So try and use a bit broader language and try and sit down with them and go, hey, what's going on at the moment? And it's kind of quite broad and it's non-threatening. And as you kind of just elicit for them what's going on, what you might do then is go, hey, it sounds like you're feeling X. Okay. Or often they'll bring it up and go, hey, it sounds like this feeling, this emotion that you've got is really driving, some of the behavior or some of the decisions that you're making or making you do X, Y, and Z. Okay. And so what you're doing in that way is you're clarifying the emotion. Now that's really important because that makes them feel heard, feel valued, feel supported. Okay. So as a leader, you're making them feel, all those kind of good emotions when they're in a difficult spot. And what that does is kind of allows the mind to calm down and allow them to engage in their executive functioning, that front of the brain. Now, here's the thing. If you don't try and go through this process, don't try and coach people around emotions when emotions are high. All right, that's really important. If they've just had an outburst in the boardroom, don't try and coach them in the moment. Wait until they've calmed down and the kind of the emotions subsided, and then sit down and have a conversation and try and identify the emotion. Remember that frame around, or that phrase, name it to tame it, becomes really important. Okay. Once you name something, then it kind of takes the power away because you know what to do with it. Once you know that, hey, I'm frustrated, or hey, I'm angry, then you can do something about that. So, okay, when I'm angry, I know that I can do X, Y, and Z. So the first two steps in this is ask questions that allow you to identify the emotion at play, and then clarify the emotion, right? Makes them feel heard and valued and understood. And then this is where we start to understand the cause of that emotion. So this is where we are developing that emotional understanding, that skill of understanding emotions. And you say, what was it that made you feel that way? What was it that got you really frustrated? Or what is it what specifically is causing you stress? And the more specific you are, the more meaningful the conversation becomes. All right. Don't just allow them to kind of give you, oh, there's just a lot on at work. Okay, cool. I understand there's a lot on at work. What specifically got you frustrated in this particular moment? And that's where, because people will do surface level thinking themselves. But the whole point about coaching them is to get them to think a bit deeper, all right, which is really important. And then once you kind of understand what it is that's led up to that, the next part is to explore alternative futures and sort of say, well, hey, what could you have done differently? Or next time you experience this emotion, what could you do differently? Okay, and get them to actually start to think about the different options that they've got, and get them to think about, hey, how do I control the emotion? How do I regulate next time round? Okay, and so you're asking these types of questions. If you were to encounter this situation again, what would be the outcome you want? And you might ask, well, hey, if that's the outcome that you want, the behavior you want to demonstrate, what would be the emotion that you need to feel in order to demonstrate that behavior? And then you might go, okay, cool. What would be the thought that needs to go through your head in order to feel that emotion? All right. And so that way you kind of, or doing all this reflective kind of work about, the person and how they manage their emotions. And really what you want to do is replace a reaction with a response. So a reaction just happens. There's no thinking about what happens in the moment. Whereas a response, there is a choice that is involved. And one of my favorite quotes is by Viktor Frankl, and he says, between stimulus and response, there is the space. And in that space is our ability to choose. And in that choice lies our freedom. And what happens is when you go through these 4 steps with individuals and you're asking them these questions and getting them to do this thinking, the more you do that, the more you encourage them to do that. And the more regular they spend time in reflection, then you're widening that space between stimulus and response, okay, which is really important. And so that's kind of the first way that you're asking these questions to get them to reflect on their emotions and the effect of their emotions. And that's one way that you can coach individuals. And that's really important. Remember, it's really important for them in order to improve their behavior and their performance. But remember, as leaders, what we want to also do is think about developing broader capability beyond the individual that we're working with. And so, if it's appropriate, what you might think to do is follow up that conversation with hey, who else in your team would benefit from a conversation like this going through this particular process? Because if they can do it for themselves, that means that they can do it for somebody else, right? And so encouraging them to think about developing the emotional intelligence in their team is one of the best ways for leaders to develop their own emotional intelligence, okay? So just as you coaching people through this process as a leader is going to make you a better leader, right? And it's going to increase your emotional intelligence. If you can get them doing it to members of their team, then that's going to improve their own emotional intelligence as well. All right. So how does that sound? Okay. What I want you to do is, based on what you've heard so far, I wanted you to put the emoji that captures the emotion that resonates based on what you've heard in the chat. All right. I'm interested to see what comes up here. So the second scenario, while you are putting those emojis in the chat, what I want, I can see one, what do we got? A face with a big, right? Got some love eyes there from Peter. Thanks for the love, Peter. Right back at you. What do we got? Amy's big smile on her face, which is awesome. Tasman, bit of a brain explode. Oh, Tamsin, sorry, I keep pronouncing your name wrong. Sorry. We've got the brain explosion emoji going on there. Daniel, classes, I'm assuming that makes what you've learned so far is making you feel smarter, Daniel. So that's awesome to see those emojis coming through. The second scenario I wanted to kind of run through with you is conflicts, right? When you've got 2 people in your team who might have conflict. So what can you do? And I'm thinking specifically of a scenario in a team that I was leading a number of years ago. We had one leader who was quite experienced, and we had another junior person coming into the team who was not as experienced. And he was doing some things with the best intent, but it was rubbing the experienced leader up the wrong way. And so I remember sitting down with that particular leader. I went through the process I'm going to talk through now, and so, a really positive outcome at the end. Okay, so the first one is create a shared understanding of what's going on. So again, we're asking questions in the way that we go about this. And the whole purpose here in this scenario is really around social awareness, all right? And then the relationship management. That's what we're trying to foster here. So it's asking strategic questions to foster social awareness, to foster relationship management. So it's talking about, all right, we need to create a shared understanding. Tell me what's going on. I want to understand your perspective as to what happened, because I, will know X, Y, and Z about the situation, and that's from my thing, but I'm probably not involved, and I probably don't know all of the. I need to know how you're feeling at or your perspective, your version of the story. So you're asking those questions. Tell me what's going on for you. You know, what was going on? What did you do? What did the other person do? Uh, and and that becomes really important. The next step there is begin with self-awareness, right? So tell me, okay, cool. So when you did that, what were you thinking? All right. And how did that make you feel? All right. When the other person did this, what was going on for you internally? All right. What was your emotional experience? You might ask some of these questions. You might use different language, but again, trying to zone in on the individual and say, okay, cool. What was going on for you? And this is again kind of creating a level of empathy between you and the individual, so they're feeling more comfortable, feeling heard, feeling valued again. And then what you do is you shift the focus from that particular individual to the other party. And what we're trying to do here is, again, get them to put themselves in the other party's shoes. And what that does is creates empathy between them, right? And so they get to imagine the emotions in other people, right? So this is how we start to build emotion. So how do you think, when you did that, how do you think that other person was feeling, right? And you might ask, well, hey, what was the intention of the other person? You know, before they acted, what was driving their behavior, right? And so when you responded to what they did, how do you think that made them feel? So you started with self-awareness and identifying the emotion for them as an individual, and then you're getting them to think about the emotions of the other party involved. Okay. And once they can kind of understand, oh yeah, that can provide a massive insight. I know for the situation I was talking about, you know, I was coaching, I'll call that girl Jane. I was coaching Jane, and she's kind of, this light bulb moment goes off, and she goes, oh, so what I did actually made him feel crappy, and therefore, yeah, okay. And so what often happens is the person you're coaching takes on a level of ownership. I'm coaching another person at the moment who the same thing happened just a couple of weeks ago in our last session, and she'd been in a conflict situation, and I asked these questions of, well, how do you think they were feeling in this particular thing? And she actually broke into tears because she realized that she'd be feeling so terrible, but it was probably nothing compared to what the other party was feeling in that circumstance as well. And so once you've done that, and that insight has come, explore how the situation could have been done differently. All right, this is kind of part of the learning. What could you have done differently, and what could you do differently in the future? And you might say, hey, well, how could you have behaved in a way that would have made them feel X in order to behave Y? All right, and that could be really beneficial in terms of learning. The important part in this particular watch is how you end up this situation. How do you determine how the relationship should move forward now? All right. And so you things like, well, hey, what do you need to do now in order to have a good working relationship moving forward? If there's some sort of conflict, there probably has to be some sort of resolution amongst the team, all right, or between those two individuals. And so if you have kind of allowed them to go through that process of becoming aware of what's going on emotionally for the other person, then they're like, okay, cool. I'm going to take some ownership on my part of the relationship, and I'm going to do something in order to try and resolve it. Ultimately, that is where you want to get to. Again, don't try and tell them, well, you need to do this. It's asking them to say, hey, given that they had this emotional response based on what you did, or based on the situation, what do you think you need to do in order to have a good working relationship moving forward? Okay. And so that becomes really important. The third scenario, okay, is in a team context. So as leaders, we all lead teams. And so how do we coach for emotional intelligence in a team context? And so, I want to start with this particular image here. When we start talking about team performance, really it's a continuing conversation between the mechanics of teams and the dynamics of teams. And so the mechanics is what teams do in order to perform. All right, it's the meetings that they hold. It's the all the different, the goals that they set. It's the, holding people accountable, all those sorts of different things, the actual work, doing the work. Then there's the dynamics piece, which is all about how the team interacts. Okay. And that's where the emotional intelligence part sits in. And the important thing is it's a continuing conversation. You can kind of see this infinity symbol there. So you always need to circle back, discuss the dynamics, and then you discuss the mechanics, and then you go back and discuss the dynamics. You go back and discuss the mechanics, go back to the dynamics again on a regular basis. All right. So what does that look like when it comes to emotional intelligence? Well, it's making sure that you are consistent in discussing these sorts of things, right? Identify the current dynamics, right? And you sort of say, well, hey, as a team, I'm sitting down, how are things going? Again, it's starting broad and general. And then what you want to do is have a discussion around, okay, are we going well? Most teams will say, yeah, we're going good. Okay, get more specific. More specific you are, the more meaningful you become. And so it's, okay, so what is good about it? What are you doing well, right? And where could we improve? Where are some of those development areas? Again, you're coaching, asking all the questions. So where are the pain points? Where are the rub points? Okay, cool. Let's focus on those. And we start to explore specific scenarios. All right. So, all right, here's the pain point. Tell me what's going on in that space. Okay, what are people actually feeling? What are the impacts of those emotions? All right, so you say, hey, I'm actually feeling really overwhelmed at the moment. Okay, cool. What's the impact of that? And people start to discuss as a team collectively the emotional experience that each one's having around specific scenarios. Okay, now I understand that for some teams and the dynamics there, that can be difficult, but the more you do that, the more benefit you're going to get. Okay, and then we generate agreed upon strategies and say, okay, as a team, how are we going to, get the emotional outcomes and therefore the behavioral outcomes and ultimately the performance outcomes. Remember, emotions drive behavior, behavior drives performance, that we need as a team. So what are we going to do? And that's important around the negative side of things and mitigating risk, mitigating negative emotions. But it's also important for the positive and say, hey, what do we want to feel like as a team when we come together? Our meetings, how do we want to feel at the end of our meetings? What do we need to do? What's the agreed upon strategy in order to feel that way, to feel good at the end of the meetings? All right. And that might be improving clarity, it might be doing X, Y, and Z, but it's having a discussion around the emotions that you want to feel in the workplace. Once we've agreed upon those strategies, then we need to continue the conversation. Don't just have the conversation once, right? But go back. You might come back in a month's time and say, hey, how did we go? We agreed upon this. How did we go on that? All right. What was the different things? And it may be difficult, but I tell you what, the benefit and the reward is there. Now, I've got one client at the moment, called Patient Zero, and they're a software development company, and I've been working with them for a couple of years in this space. My brief from the CEO when I first got engaged was, I want you to help raise the collective emotional intelligence of the entire company. All right, so that was my brief. And so what we've been doing is working with teams and different strategies, many of which I've kind of discussed on today around how do we do that. Now, that's shown significant results, and part of the proof is that just in the last 2 weeks, they won an award, a national award around innovation in the workplace for their ways of working. Okay, really is the ways that they work in teams. And sort of a big part of that is a team sciences project that I've been part of. Now, it's not, purely because of me, but that's the fact that they are discussing emotional intelligence in the workplace has been part of their success. All right, so that's kind of the three scenarios that I wanted to to kind of discuss with you and just kind of highlight how you could practically use coaching, asking strategic questions to enhance the emotional intelligence of your people in the workplace. So, what I want you to do now is think about which of those three. Is it working with individuals? Is it working to resolve conflict? Or is it kind of collective team discussions around dynamics that you and your team in your workplace would benefit most from? Put that in the chat. I'm really interested to hear. And so while you're doing that, this is the time where I kind of let you know, hey, if you want to know more, if you would love some help, then this is where you can get help, okay? We've got coaching options and we've got training options that I can help you with. So if you reckon that, you personally or some individual leaders would really benefit from working with me and helping to develop their ability to coach, ability to develop emotional intelligence, or just their emotional intelligence themselves, you can reach out. We've got different coaching packages there. We can include personality assessments. You can get a copy of the book and all that sort of stuff. And if that is something that is really interesting to you, love to hear more information. What I want you to do is just put coaching in the chat right now. The other option that I can help you with is kind of training. You say, hey, it's not just individuals. Collectively, we need to get better at this type of thing. And so, I can do kind of webinars. I could even run this specific webinar specifically internally for your team if you wanted. We can do lunch and learn workshops. If you want more than just a one-off kind of thing, we can develop a program. And so that would be a training option. And if you are interested in hearing more about that, just put training in the chat right now. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but if you are interested, they are some ways that I can help. The other thing I just want to let you know about is the Coaching Leader book. My book is coming out in the next couple of weeks. If you haven't ordered it, then you can do so now, pre-order it now. And the best way to do that is at the website there. And it's all around, as it says, essential skills to enhance your leadership and develop your people day to day. So, today has been focused on emotional intelligence, but this book goes into detail around how you as a leader can use coaching to develop your people to enhance the way that you lead in the workplace. All right. So that is there as well. And hey, guys, now is the time for questions. If you had any questions, then I would love you to put them in the chat right now. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time answering those. We've got 8 minutes before we hit the 1 hour mark and that sort of thing. So we'll spend that time answering questions right now. Right, Peter is asking, looking forward to reading. Am I doing an audio book version? Look, in the first instance, no, but I do have someone looking into the process of developing an audio or recording an audio version of the book, and so potentially that might be coming out in definitely not by the end of the year, but potentially next year sometime. We'll just have to wait and see. I can't promise anything. Does anyone else have any questions? Do you have any specific scenarios that you would like me to kind of give my thoughts on in this context while we have a couple of minutes before we all sign off? While we're just waiting there, I think one of the common questions I get asked often, right, is emotional intelligence something you are born with or something you can develop, right? And definitely, there is variation there in terms of some people are kind of have a natural affinity to or a natural level of emotional intelligence, ability to use emotional information, but it is definitely a skill that can be developed. And just as I said, that the 4 skills that I highlighted there, if we can actually work with people to and kind of measure as well the I guess, progress. You can get a baseline measurement of where people are at from an emotional intelligence skills perspective, do some work with them, and then retest them in 12 months time. And we have been able to show that you can significantly increase your ability to perceive and understand and then use and manage emotional information to get effective relational outcomes, which is awesome. So Tim, Lily, all right, how would you suggest you engage a smaller team within a larger one who don't get involved much? So look, a lot of the different things will be at play if you think it's emotions are at play, right? So I've seen smaller teams within larger ones who quite often the way, or so part of the reason that they don't get involved as much is because they feel isolated. They don't feel connected. They don't feel part of the bigger group. And so working to understand what's going on and what's the source of that. It may be that they're not, they don't necessarily have the opportunity to collaborate. It may be a whole different bunch of reasons. They're located in a different physical location, and so therefore, the geographical barriers create psychological barriers. They just don't feel connected and that sort of thing. So, I'd be sitting down and kind of go through the same process and I go, hey, what's going on here at the moment? What are the different things that are at play? And hey, how are you feeling as part of the broader team? Do you actually feel part of it? Do you feel connected? What's going on for you? And starting there, and then kind of tease out, well, hey, we actually feel really frustrated at X, Y, and Z that happens from this department or this area in the broader team. And once you uncover that, remember, identify the emotion, clarify, and then kind of explore what you might be able to do. And might ask, well, hey, what would you like to feel? Would you like to feel connected? What kind of emotions would you like to feel? And then start going, well, okay, cool. How do we make those? Are there changes that we can do in job design? Are there changes that we might be able to make in communication? Are there changes that we might be able to make in getting you opportunities to collaborate in particular decisions that might be made or something like that? And then you can work towards that agreed upon solution in order to make them feel part of the team. And when they feel part of it, they're probably going to invest more. So I hope that helps answer that question, Tim. Peter, is the one-word barometer a good thing to start meetings with a regular? Yes, definitely, Peter. So what I actually encourage a lot of teams in team meetings is to do some form of check-in, like the one-word barometer, where they actually get team members to express how they're feeling. Now, there's different ways to do that, but one-word barometer is just one. But I mentioned before the one-word barometer, I was going to explain a bit more about that and why it's beneficial. So first of all, one-word barometer gives, particularly in a meeting context, right? It gives, it helps develop emotional intelligence in and of itself, because it helps people practice to stop and actually reflect, okay, what emotion am I feeling? All right, so it's promoting self-awareness, and once they're aware of something, then they can control something, right? So that means if they're aware that, hey, I'm actually feeling really frustrated at the moment, then they can't control that frustration during the meeting unless they're aware of it. So you're getting them to become aware of it. You're also getting them to differentiate between different emotions, because if they've got to put their finger on one emotion, they've got to say, well, am I frustrated, or am I agitated, or am I angry, or am I sad? So you're getting them to reflect and then actually isolate and put their finger on one emotion. So that in itself is really beneficial from a developing emotional intelligence perspective. What it also does in the meeting context, okay, is that it allows everybody else to know where that person is at. And that is really important because it allows them to accurately interpret, right, the messages, the communication from that individual. So there was, there's a situation recently where I used the one-word barometer as an introduction to a meeting, and one person had just eaten a really massive, rich meal for lunch. And so she came in and she said, oh, I'm actually feeling really fatigued and lethargic, and that lunch is just not sitting well with me. And so what that allowed us to do was recognize that, and that when she was in the meeting and she was listening, but had a, kind of eyes closed and hand like this, just, dealing with that. We didn't interpret that as she was disinterested. We didn't interpret that as she was frustrated or angry at something that was going on. We were able to interpret that and say, hey, she's just physically, not in the right space to be fully engaged and enthusiastic like normal. And so really a beneficial tool for you. Hey guys, it is 1 p.m. We have just clocked on. I don't want to waste any more of your time. It's not waste today. Hopefully has been valuable for you. But I don't want to use up your time because it is valuable. So I thank you for joining me. I look forward to catching you in future webinars, in future sessions, and I look forward to hearing from you at some point in the future. Until then, lead well.